Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Connect Conversations. Today's conversation is all about developing the business case with special guest Drew Troyer. And it's brought to you as a part of Mobius Connect's ongoing YouTube series, Connect Conversations. I am Kim Fugger, and I will be the manager, or I'm the manager of Mobius Connect, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I'll really let Ron and Drew take over. But first, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to our host, Ron Moore. Ron is a global reliability improvement expert. We do normally have Doug Plucknett with us, but he's unavailable today. So hi, Ron. Hello, Drew.
Hi there. Hello to everyone.
Yes. Well, before I officially pass the microphone over to you guys, I just want to encourage our audience here today to submit any questions that they have into the chat function of your Zoom platform here. And Ron and Drew will be happy to answer your questions during our time here today. If we don't get to all the questions, then they will follow up with you after the meeting today. All right, guys, I'm going to pass things over to you.
All righty. Thank you. And thanks to all those out there who are currently listening or who will be listening in the future. Today, we're going to talk about developing the business case for reliability. And we have the honor of having Drew Troyer with us. I've known Drew for, well, too many years, probably, 20, 30, I don't remember.
Yeah, it's in that range, yeah.
Off and on for a long time. And he's really quite accomplished in reliability field and particularly in the field related as it relates to the business benefit of reliability. So I'm going to make a few comments and I'm going to turn it over to Drew to make a few comments. Then we may have a discussion back and forth after that. But, to me, the benefit of reliability is fairly simple. You get more capacity, you get lower costs, you get better safety, and you get an environmentally sound operation. You get fewer releases and your licensed operator isn't under threat. And so it's pretty straightforward. What I've typically seen for the what you might call typical plant I've been in is production capacity improvements of at least 10%. And sometimes as on a particular line, as much as 50% or more. And maintenance cost reductions on the order of 10% or more. And I've got a lot of data that says, it's safer, you're more energy efficient because you're not burning up, BTUs doing worthless work or not doing work at all, not producing anything. And of course, you're environmentally better. And probably something that's kind of hard to measure compared to all those other things, you get much higher morale and engagement in the workforce. So there are lots and lots of benefits. Now, so what does it consist of, this business case? Well, in simple terms, it's like an A3, current state, crappy, future state, wonderful, business case, boku bucks, and then an action plan that lays out how you're going to accomplish that. And in doing that, in the execution part, some of the really key things are, number one is executive sponsorship. And I don't mean approval. I mean sponsorship, active engagement, support, demanding and supporting all the things you're trying to do and really being active, much as the same as they would for safety. And it requires a partnership amongst the various functions in the organization, production and maintenance in particular, but also the folks in marketing and sales. Don't sell stuff you can't make. The guys in design, you'll design it for reliability, maintainability. Guys in purchasing, total cost of ownership, and so on. And measures that facilitate their collaboration as opposed to measures that facilitate their conflict. And most companies have the latter, not the former. So getting some folks to share some measures that are critical to success. And then, of course, a process for engaging the workforce in process improvement so they have a sense of ownership, control, purpose, and that sort of thing. So those are my, kind of high level remarks, and I'll chime in here from time to time as well. So Drew, with all that said, turn it back to you.
Okay, well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm sad that Doug couldn't join us, but we'll carry on, and hopefully we'll get Doug in the next topic. But I agree with all the things that you said, and I've got to be honest with you. I'm just kind of going back. So like so many of us, my roots came in what we would call the condition monitoring or condition-based maintenance revolution, I think, which was mostly led by the U.S. Power generation, petrochemical, and pulp and paper industry, where we were transitioning from a time-based approach to managing our equipment to a condition-based approach. And then you probably remember, I think it was probably around the year 1992, Ron, we kind of quit being, all of a sudden we weren't maintenance engineers, we were reliability engineers. We didn't know what that meant. I sure didn't know what it meant. I actually went back to school and did a little bit of graduate work at the University of Texas, figure out what that, I actually got a book on reliability engineering when that became popular. And I sort of read through it. And there was one thing I did know from that book. I was not a reliability engineer, not back in 1992 or whatever it was. And so I went back and got a little bit of training, and we were doing such exciting things. And you remember this time, it was all new. Everything was different. And honestly, I thought that we were within 3 or 4 years, this stuff made so much sense. Everyone's just going to adopt it. And I was going to have to figure out something else to do. Well, 30 years later, I'm still doing the same thing, So
with 30 years to go.
With 30 years to go, I'm going to run out of life, unfortunately. But a little bit later on, I think a bit about my history. I co-founded Noria Corporation,
right?
And we really focused on lubrication and oil analysis, that part of condition monitoring. And, we just weren't getting any traction. And I can remember it seemed like we never broke the mold of being maintenance guys, which, when you think maintenance in an organization, people think cost center, right? They think cost center.
Or
breakdowns or, pain in the backside, whatever you want to call it. And so I started thinking we really need to take a different approach because dollars talk, right? Dollars talk. All right. And there's more to the dashboard. You mentioned safety. I use the work that you've done correlating safety to reliability, but it's common sense. I think some guy wrote a book on that, making common sense common practice. Do you know that guy?
Got some familiarity with him.
Likewise with energy, but I put a little time into developing a course and some tools that I call plant reliability in dollars and cents to try to get that value proposition and get those senior managers involved. And we're still struggling with that. And you mentioned KPIs to get everybody on the same page. We have a lot of KPIs that measure, if you will, siloed performance. But if you look in the silos in the organization, maintenance, their job is to minimize cost. Sales, their job is to maximize revenue. Production, their job is to maximize revenue. Procurement, their job is to minimize costs. When you put it all together, really, who's watching the bottom line? We have to look at value creation. I still think we have some work to do in that case, in that area, to make the case for reliability. The other thing is, Ron, it's not somehow or another, reliability has become viewed as being synonymous with maintenance, and it really is not. In fact, reliability, it's not at all. Reliability is arguably the antithesis of maintenance. Reliability is not fixing things, right? Maintenance is fixing things. So it's interesting. You and I have both had some history with the Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals, and there was a time when I served on the board, and I can remember, perhaps somewhat naively, I suggested changing the name because we didn't want to do maintenance. We wanted reliability, and that did not meet with a lot of enthusiasm. But those two words have been put together, maybe a little bit too closely.
Well, I don't. You may not have been there. I did a keynote years ago where SMRP, and I made a big, huge M, and all the other letters little tiny. And I suggested that what you really wanted to be is big R, and all the other letters were little tiny. And well, I don't know how far that went. Apparently not very far.
Well, I think that you and I had the same message there. So no, it did not go very far, but ultimately that's where the money is. And something, you mentioned the percentages of opportunity, and while I can't provide details, I'm very actively involved still with a lot of clients. I work globally in the field in my consulting practice, but to give you an idea of the opportunity, it took us a couple of years, but over about a 2.5-year period, we took one of our sites, which is really now our North Star with the corporation that I'm working with very closely. We took them from a 67% OEE to a 92% OEE. That's a 40% increase in our production. And for those of you who don't have a lot of background in finance, we have this concept called marginal return. And for a fixed asset like a plant, your next ton or unit or pound or whatever unit you choose of production is always more profitable than your last. To a point, there's a theoretical limit because you've got to get so much production just to clear your fixed costs, right? And then once you get past your fixed costs, you're on an incline, you're on a slope in terms of the unit profitability. It's a game changer, Ron, going from 67% to 92% reliability. And there are so many other benefits. You mentioned energy. I'm delivering in August a keynote address on that very topic, on the relationship between energy and reliability. I think that if you look at Department of Energy research, the average for industry, so if I look at mining, chemical, refining, cement, all the big energy industries, the average opportunity to reduce energy consumption by implementing existing best practices. I'm not talking about investing in R&D and figure out how to turn carbon dioxide into fuel or anything. I'm talking about just existing best practices. The Department of Energy has estimated a 20% reduction in energy consumption. That's massive.
Yeah. Well, just a side comment, DuPont one time did a study. Now, this was years ago, back in my CSI days, but 30% of their energy consumption was during non-productive time.
Exactly.
Now think about that. You're not making a cent and you're just burning energy, hand over fist. So
Yeah.
it's remarkable. Yeah. Just
It is a remarkable, and that 20%, Ron, goes straight to the bottom line. I mean, it
yeah,
doesn't pass through cost of goods sold. Plus, that 20% is all often case, it's in the form of parasitic friction. So it's actually causing wear and tear on your equipment. So you win in terms of just the price of energy. You win in terms of reducing wear and tear on your equipment. You win in terms of carbon. General rule of thumb is, every kilowatt hour equivalent, all right, so we're looking at all fuels in a balanced equation, is about 0.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent emission avoided. And everybody now is focusing on, and I'm glad they are, greenhouse gas emissions. And most of the clients that I work with and the listeners, have near zero goals. So all of this stuff, it adds up. Reliability is just such a winning proposition for the business. Why it is not on the top 5, and you mentioned sponsorship. Why it's not on the top 5 list for every CEO of every heavy equipment asset dependent industry it remains to be a mystery to me, because all good things come from those assets performing, and all bad things come from them not performing.
Well, I have a theory on that, and part of this theory has been in effect not perpetuated, I guess is the right word, by SMRP, and that is when folks at the executive level think of, when you use the word reliability with them, they think equipment maintenance.
Yeah.
And so it suddenly becomes a lesser issue, and somebody else is going to handle that. And it's just a really no criticism of them, but it's a profoundly ignorant approach to assuring operational performance and excellence. And one of the things that I've taken to doing is, how do you define reliability? Well, SMRP has their definition, SAE does, and it has to do with the equipment performing under stated conditions without failure. Well, I think that's insufficient. And so what I've suggested to folks is, look, reliability is the ability of a production system to produce the maximum in quality product on time, in full, at the lowest sustainable cost. And OEE is the best measure of that, because OEE takes in, or asset utilization, use your own definition or words, but you're going to measure against ideal, and you're going to manage the losses from ideal. And if you take that view, then suddenly your world is much bigger, the opportunity is much bigger, and the potential profit is much bigger. And
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, so it's something I would encourage everybody out there to do, is to think in terms of what the potential is. How can I capture that potential and do a better job? Just taking off on one of the comments you made, let's just take a theoretical example. You got a company or a manufacturing plant, and they're, let's say, generating $300 million of product a year, okay? And their maintenance costs, just for talking purposes, are 30 million, and their gross profit is 20%. The money that's left over after your cost of goods sold. And so let's see, and if they're operating typically, and you could get another 10% out of this baby, what does that mean to you? Well, it depends on your material cost, but what it probably means, 30 million, 20%, that's 60 million, 10%, you're probably looking at least $6, maybe $10 million, depending on all those other cost factors. And your maintenance costs are going to go down at least 10%. So you're looking at least $10 million, could be 20. You got to go through the math and look at what your raw material and energy and so on costs are. So you're talking about, dramatic improvements in your profitability, lower costs, and that bonus you get of people being engaged and so on. So it's really important that you take those notional figures, run them, and then go back and see where you are, and then adjust the figures to suit you, and then take that to the executives. Because if you put 10 million bucks in front of them, they're probably going to be interested. So
you make a great point, and it kind of goes back to your the math you were going through. It's a leveraged asset, so a small increase in additional production, once you're past your fixed cost coverage, a small increase has a disproportional increase in profit. I want to make a couple of comments to what you just said. I totally agree with your definition of reliability. So sure, I understand the engineering definition of reliability, but to me, it's the economic one. And so whenever
the business definition,
business definition, whenever I'm working with clients, I think metrics and KPIs are really important, because we've always heard that what gets measured gets done. That's right. There's an intermediary. What gets measured gets rewarded, and what gets rewarded gets done. So we have to be really careful in selecting our metrics. And I always advise clients that when it comes to the business, if you've got a KPI, now all KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs, right? So if you have a key performance indicator, you need to be able to show line of sight relationship to return on net assets or return on capital employed. And for those of you who are familiar with that return on net assets is literally returns, which is your income statement in the numerator, and net assets, which would be your replacement asset value for the plant, in the denominator. All right. So it's income statement divided by the balance sheet. All right. And the reason you need to look at return on net assets is there's a lot of different ways to get reliability. So I will tell you, as a reliability engineer, the fastest way to get reliability mathematically is to have 2 when you only need 1. Better yet, have 3 when you only need 1. However, the cost of redundancy could exceed the value of that enhanced reliability. So you need to make sure that if you have KPIs, that those KPIs are aligned to return on net assets, unless, of course, they are specifically aligned to another dashboard goal. So we've got our big dashboard goals, which are RONA, return on net assets, or in some instances, return on capital employed. They mean about the same thing, or safety, or environmental performance, and where it's appropriate, quality and or customer satisfaction. Otherwise,
some people, use return on shareholder equity as another.
Return on shareholder equity. That one to me gets a little distant
it's
from the 4 walls of the plant, but it's another one that's in the mix. But a point that I think, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this. I think as a community, we need a little bit more training in this area, and I would be happy to team up with you on this. I don't know that we are necessarily good at presenting investments in reliability as value propositions. I think sometimes we present them to senior management as cost propositions. We want to spend this money, as opposed to, it's one thing if somebody comes to me, one of my employees comes to me and says, "Hey, Drew, we want to spend this amount of money." I perceive that differently than if they come to me and say, "Hey, Drew, I want to make you this amount of money." You follow me?
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure that we have traditionally positioned investments and that's what they are. They are investments. They're not expenses. They are investments in asset reliability. I'm not sure we position them as value propositions. I think sometimes we go a little bit more the cost proposition approach. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, I think so too. You know, we want to spend more money in maintenance, or spend more money on a piece of equipment, or spend more on, you know, a piece of software, whatever it is. And the question that typically comes back was, what's the return on that? Rather than going in and saying, look, I know how to make us another $100 million. And oh, by the way, you'll have to invest 10 million to get it. You lead with what they're going to get. You don't lead with what it's going to cost. I was working with another company, and we were at a huge operation, and our very first slide to the president of the division, along with all the VPs and all site managers were in the room. Our very first slide was a number, and it was a $150, 000,000. And we just put that slide up, and there it is. Everybody looks at it and goes, huh, wonder what that's about.
It's a big number.
Yeah. And then we said, all right, now that we have your attention, we're going to show you how we're going to get that money. And then we went into the process for increasing capacity, reducing costs, getting the right processes in place so that money comes back to you as a consequence. Yeah. So, and that's a very, by the way, it's a very effective way to do that. You just have to have, you know, you got to validate your numbers. And the thing of it is, if you're within 50 million, you know, if you're within half, if you get half of what you promised, everybody's going to be happy.
Yeah. Okay? Even if you're half wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're half wrong, and if you're, you know, twice as good, everybody be really happy. So just, you know, you got to validate a little bit of that to make sure it's somewhere in the right ballpark. But once people have bought into it, and particularly if the investment is substantially smaller, you know, the investment is, you know, 10 million for 100 million, nobody's going to care about the 10 million. If you spend 12, so what? You got 120. Yeah. You know, so you got to lead with what you're going to get, and then tell them what the investment is, and then all the other benefits. So
an investment is the key word. It's not an expense. It's an investment in the business. Yeah. You know, there was a study some years ago along that line that you probably have seen it. It was really not by a company in the asset management space. They're really one of these Boston think tanks. They're in the benchmarking space called the Aberdeen Group. Did you see that 2009 study, How to Talk Asset Management to the CFO?
If I did, I don't remember it. I could have, and it's buried in the bowels of my, you know, brain. But
it's been a few years ago. I'm sure that you have seen it. I'd be happy to send it to you, or be happy to send it to anybody listening. It's a PDF file. It's publicly available. It's not anything that I would be breaching any responsibility. But they looked at, if you will, lower quartile, average, and then upper quartile performers on asset management. On OEE, you mentioned OEE is the true north for us, right? It's our compass reading.
It is the measure of reliability, in my view.
It is in my view too, because it looks at how we're doing relative to perfection, right?
Right. But just to back up a little bit, some folks not very effective. It's not very effective for them. For example, power stations and a cycling power plant. So you have to pick other measures that represent perfection, that define the business in its context. So for example,
I agree with that. Yeah. So and I look at OEE conceptually, and then I modify it. So for instance, having a strong background in power generation, I, for instance, replaced quality with heat rate. Which is the efficiency with which we convert chemically stored energy into power and to electrical energy.
Yeah.
But they did this benchmark, and one of the things that, having presented to a lot of executives, I don't know if you've run into this, and I think maybe they've been conditioned this way. Executives think that if we're talking about improving reliability, I'm asking them to spend more money on maintenance. But
Right.
what's interesting is the data reveals something very different. The better asset managers who had higher availability and higher throughput performance, right, tended to have lower maintenance costs, which may
Well, yeah.
sound counterintuitive until you think about it. But if your machines are running well, they're not breaking, you're not having to fix them, right? You're not spending
Right.
money fixing them. So those things tend to run counterintuitive. And I'd be happy to share that with anybody that wants that report, and I hope you'll read it. I actually took that data and I put it into a PowerPoint slide, and I made up a company. I said, what if we adopted, what if we were lower quartile and we adopted the average in the upper quartile? I ran that into an income statement and even all the way down to share price. And I actually built a consulting practice out of that, going into companies and saying, here's where you are, here's where you can be, and here's the value that we think that we can get to. And of all of the people that I dealt with, and I'm not talking about clients, I did it with a lot of clients, the person in the organization that loved that process the most was always the CFO. The reason being is he would say, wow, now I actually get what reliability and asset management are all about. He hadn't seen that before. That tells me maybe we're not doing the greatest job yet of communicating that.
Yeah, one of the first papers I wrote, Drew, when I first started doing the consulting shtick, was what you just said. It was conversion of the improvement you can get through reliability into share price.
Yeah,
and it was just phenomenal.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So
though, we talk a lot about the carrot. There's a stick also. I was working with a client in the petrochemical industry and in the oil industry, and I was on a very, very large project that was running over budget. And they were looking at it was running over budget and over schedule. It was a massive project. They were looking at making some cuts. And one of the areas, we were on the list of things to be reduced, the investment in reliability. And they were doing a lot of stuff up front, doing their RCMs and building out their equipment strategies. And I was deep in it. And I was sort of nominated as the person to, defend our position. Everyone at that point had to justify their existence. And so I created this presentation along with the team. And I'm sitting in the evening going through the presentation. I said, I've missed the mark. And this was in 2013. I remember because I went to yahoo.com and I got the stock price for this company and compared them to British Petroleum using a relative scale. So just percentage change on your y-axis with everything normalized for splits and everything like that. And I tracked that over 10 years comparing these two companies. And I superimposed three events. Number one was in 2005. It was Texas City. British Petroleum had a large explosion in Texas City. And these two companies are near perfect competitors. So their stock price, they went right along with each other. And in 2005, Texas City, there was no real change. So they continued to track together. I don't know if you know this, but BP was found criminally negligent of what is in effect poor asset management. In 2006,
I've read the book.
Yeah, I figured you had. In 2006, there was another event in Prudhoe Bay where BP's pipeline had a massive spill that had significant environmental effects. And they had made some decisions that ultimately, again, they were guilty of poor asset management. At that point, there was a significant deviation in the stock price between these two companies. BP's went down, the other company went up. And then they got to a point where they were co-varying. They were moving together, but there still was this gap left over. It's hard to have two events, Texas City and Prudhoe Bay, so close to one another.
And then you had Deepwater Horizon.
Well, then 2010 came, and you had Macondo, Deepwater Horizon, and there was a dramatic shift, obviously. And in 2013, I made this presentation. I said, gentlemen, if an investor were to invest $1,000 in 2003 in our stock, in 2013, it would be worth $3,500. If an investor were to invest $1,000 in BP stock in 2003, in 2013, it would be worth $1,000, zero growth. That puts a lot of stress on senior managers of an organization, because the only way they can attract investment is with a very aggressive dividend strategy, which is extremely tough on cash flow. Needless to say, we did not get cut from but so there's a stick to reliability too. There's the carrot. If you have good reliability, you get the benefits in terms of improved profit, safety, and environmental performance. But the stick is you can destroy the value of your company. So
you don't have it.
Yeah. And you mentioned this in the opening statement. In some instances, you can lose your license to operate.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I wanted to mention here on particularly on cost cutting, I tend to think in terms of improving, operational performance. But there are a lot of folks out there, particularly those who are in, say, some serious financial difficulty. They will tend to want to cost cut. In particular, they'll tend to want to reduce headcount. We're going to cut out a bunch of employees. And before you do that, one of the things I strongly suggest to folks is look at your cost of goods sold structure. And what you very often find is that your labor costs are about 15% of your cost of goods sold. Materials about 50%, energy, overheads, the rest, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you cut your labor force 10%, you save what? 1.5%.
1.5%.
Yeah. I mean, that gets lost in the noise depending on the business circumstance of the economy and so on. On the other hand, if you could engage those employees in reducing the 85% through higher yields, better, asset capability, better production, better lower energy consumption, and so on and so forth. I mean, that would just overwhelm any cost savings that you might achieve through a headcount reduction. And I'm not saying you never should do a headcount reduction. You may have to on occasion, but that ought to be your last choice. Your first choice ought to be, how do I engage the workforce in doing defect elimination, process improvement, so that the 85% is addressed more fully. And I think a lot of folks don't think that way. And,
No, they don't.
And they should without question, and run the numbers. Yeah.
It's laziness, Ron. It's lazy leadership. I'm not a believer in cost cutting. I am a believer in cost engineering.
Cost management is a phrase I use. Yeah.
Where we are thoughtfully looking at where the money's going, as opposed, cost cutting is arbitrary. And if you're going to take that pathway of reducing headcount to reduce costs, and you're going to do it arbitrarily, you're obviously going to go for your highest paid people. And in my experience,
not always.
In my experience, is that often leads to a phenomena, called corporate amnesia, where we lose valuable people and we literally forget how to run our business. So I can remember in the power generation industry, and you played around in that industry. Condition monitoring in the early days was heavily focused on power generation. The Southern Cal Edisons and the PG&Es and
Duke Power.
Dukes and Southerns and so on and so forth. We worked with them all. You did, we did, and I remember at the time when a lot of those companies during the deregulation, they were going through these major headcount reductions. Ron, these plants forgot how to run their business. They literally forgot how to run their business because they cut so deep into that knowledge pool, and they were so dependent on tribal knowledge for running that plant. They had no, if you will, systems that enable sustainability, and that's something that to me that's how you engineer cost. Is you engage those people. I love exactly what you said, because it seems like in a lot of plants we have these. It's almost like they get to the gate, they badge in, and they're supposed to take their brain out and leave it at the front gate. Go about doing their business, and they can pick their brain up on the way out. We need to do a better job of engaging those people from the neck up, right?
Yeah.
Not just to do things, but to think through things. I have having worked for many, many years as a reliability engineer, have always had a great respect for a really committed artisan, millwright, mechanic, electrician. These people are the ones that really know. And I've always felt that it's my job to clear the hurdles to enable them to come up with the solutions that will really make sense. And we really should be taking that approach as opposed to just, and I get it. People aren't, there's sometimes you reach tough times and you gotta get the cost out, but let's not do it all of a sudden. Let's try to create a culture of cost management, cost engineering.
Well, Klaus Blake has some data, and he says 70% of all improvement ideas come from the shop floor.
Absolutely.
70%. And, my mantra is, if you want to understand the problems with the work, talk to the workers. I mean, it's such an obvious thing to do. And once you talk to them, though, you've got to put in place, systems or processes to allow those ideas to come to fruition. So one of the things I strongly encourage folks to do is have structured improvement time. Now,
Absolutely.
You structure it according to your need, but something notionally might be once a week, you have a half a day to restore an asset to like new condition, or once a week, you have a half a day to review a startup procedure, or to review a training process, or to do something that's important to you, that if you solve it and you improve it, you're going to improve the performance of the plant. And then maybe it's once a month you spend a day, or maybe it's every other week you spend a day. It's going to be context dependent, but you've got to have structured improvement time and facilitators who can extract those ideas and facilitate the discussion on how you go about making sure those things are captured and implemented. And if you don't have that, then you're kind of depending on sort of a random process to, stumble across things and make it happen. But if you have that, you're more likely to get it.
I think you're absolutely right. I actually love that idea of, setting aside improvement time. Now, there's a point at which I do believe that would transition over time into something that's hardwired into the culture, where it really is cultural. But I've never really thought about that idea of, kind of building in this innovation time where, we're just going to think out of the box time or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I've wondered, how do you get to the point? I've had the privilege, and you probably have too, working with Toyota, both in North America as well as in Japan. And, for instance, when you're at a Toyota side, I remember I was fairly early in my career when I was, at least my consulting career, when I was working with Toyota, and I couldn't believe it, that Kaizen culture. It's just always happening. Anything happens, they go through the 5 why or why analysis, part of the Kaizen culture. But I don't think that it's a switch that you can just turn on. I love that idea of having that set aside time to kind of get the ball rolling, show the value, and then push it along.
Well, notionally, you have to do it 21 times before it starts to become a habit.
I've heard that.
And that goes back to neural programming language, where you learn a new language, and you don't really learn it until you've repeated the words, the phrases, and so on 21 times, and then becomes instinctive. It's there. It's kind of like what little Russian I know. I don't even think about how to say hello, how are you, and all that sort of thing. So
it's just kind of hardwired. I had a guy, it's kind of funny that I had a guy, he used an analogy to get that kind of built into the culture and get it second nature. He said it's like painting. If you're painting something, it takes 21 dips to get a good painted surface. And he said unless it's for managers, and they require about 35 dips. So
yeah. One other thing I wanted to touch on, we talked about measures that facilitate collaboration instead of conflict, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I think it would behoove everybody to do, and if I were the boss, if I'm the site manager or the VP of operations or whatever, I would have the production manager responsible for maintenance and repair costs, maintenance schedule compliance, okay? And I would have the maintenance manager responsible for production schedule compliance and maintenance costs and maintenance schedule compliance. And when you do that, those two guys, since they're both responsible for that, and their annual bonus is tied to that, they're going to spend more time together talking about the trade-offs necessary to achieve those things and to do what's right for the business as a whole. And another example, and you can make up all kinds of examples, and each company ought to do their own, but another example that you come across a lot is the storeroom, right?
Yeah.
The purchasing guy, he wants zero stock, right? Because that's working capital not working. It's money just tied up sitting there. It's not doing anything for you.
Right.
The maintenance manager wants a spare plant. Well, neither of those is compatible with operating a proper operation. So
no,
I would hold both of them, right? The purchasing / stores manager and the maintenance manager, both responsible for inventory levels, inventory turns, and for stock out rate, right? The service level. And I would try to tie that service level back into the production capacity that I've lost because of poor service. And so when you get those folks thinking at a systems level, at trying to do what's right for the business as a whole, you're going to get much more cooperation, collaboration, and you're going to get folks doing what's right a lot more of the time than you previously did.
I couldn't agree more. I'm a big advocate. I use the term cross-functional balance scorecard, where your business is my business is your business, everybody's business is everybody's business, to create that cooperation and kind of break down the silos. Another thing that on the rewards, because I just think we sometimes reward the wrong behaviors. I had an experience working with one of the big automotive companies, Ron. I'm going to say, I'm thinking it was probably 1995. They were transitioning at that time where more and more of the parts were very sophisticated, plastic injection molded parts. That's why cars don't rattle as much. And so these big presses for injection molding were becoming much larger, more sophisticated, and higher pressure. And they were really having problems with these hydraulic systems. And I went in and I looked at it and I said, okay, well, your problem is contaminant levels. They're too high. They said, okay, what do we need to do to clean them up? And I told them what they need to do and blah, blah, blah. It's pretty simple technically. They said, great, we need you to train our people. And so I put together a class for the millwrights, all right? Young engineer, teaching all these millwrights, contamination control. I got to tell you, Ron, I felt personally threatened. These guys hated me. They absolutely hated me. And back then I was probably, 145 pounds soaking wet. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the automotive millwright is one of the larger versions of our species. And there's about 50 of them and one of me. Well, during a break, a master millwright walks up to me. He said, Drew, there's nothing wrong with your message. They agree with you. They understand. Problem is, you're talking about taking away their hunting cabins and their fishing boats. I haven't said anything about hunting and fishing. He said, yeah, well, about 30% of their pay comes from overtime. And ding, it occurred to me, I'm preaching something that is gonna make their pay envelope a little bit thinner. So their extrinsic rewards are going to be reduced. And then it got me thinking a little bit about, and anybody that's ever been the call out engineer over a weekend has had a situation where something goes wrong in the plant and you go in the weekend, you get it back up and running, whatever it is. And, the millwrights, mechanics, electricians, whatever, come in. Well, that next week, the plant manager, production manager, maintenance manager, they're going to seek you out and pat you on the back. Thank you for getting the plant up and running. All right. Intrinsic rewards. Have you ever seen a plant manager seek out, for instance, a lube tech for running a good grease route, or for a mechanic using a torque wrench properly and sequencing his bull? Have you ever seen any behavior like that? No, we are rewarding precisely the behavior we don't want. We're not rewarding these proactive behaviors of preventing problems from occurring. We're not rewarding the proactive behaviors of 5 why analysis and on-the-spot troubleshooting and investing in the reliability. So the rewards aren't just at the management level. We need to extend those rewards all the way into the organization, and we need to facilitate cooperation between the maintenance and operations team. If it's at the end of the month, the operations team, if they're a few tons short, if the machine's set to run from 0 to 10, they'll crank it up to 12. Well, we know what that does from a stress strength interference perspective. So we need to extend those rewards beyond just that management team. I agree with you wholeheartedly about getting procurement and operations and maintenance, and even our capital projects group. Their job is to get it functional and get it cheap. It may not necessarily be to get it reliable and maintainable and so on and so forth. So we need to break all those silos down, because the performance of an asset is not one person's job, it's all of our jobs. And it does, in this case, takes a village to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that in my former life that I did was our reward structure was based on company performance.
Sure.
And so we had certain percentage of our profit was set aside to reward the entire company based on a formula. And typically it was a percentage of their base pay.
Yeah.
And so if the company did well, everybody got a chunk of money. If the company didn't do well, dang, didn't get much money. Or didn't get any extra for sure, So, and then we had another little smaller pool of money that we were rewarded extraordinary contribution or performance. So, and that way the incentives are tied to the company's performance, not to the individual's overtime. Now, we paid overtime, don't get me wrong.
Legally compliant, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would step in if somebody was working what I considered to be too much overtime. They had 3 or 4 or 5 weeks in a row where they were doing 60 hours. I would step in and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put people under that kind of stress, and certainly not going to get them used to that kind of income.
Yeah.
So anyways,
Yeah.
for what that's worth out there, so.
Shared rewards mean a lot. And I tell you what, a lot of people, when I start talking about rewards with my clients, they say, oh gosh, dealing with HR issues of money, something that costs you nothing to recognize people. And
Yep.
intrinsic rewards go a long way. Recognition, attaboys, thank yous,
Yep.
from leadership, they go a long way. Just saying, man, you did a heck of a job on that. You made a real contribution. Thank you.
Yep.
That is surprisingly compelling. For those of you who've not studied this kind of stuff, there's a guy by the name of Hertzberg who had this theory about human motivation, and he calls money, extrinsic rewards, dissatisfiers. It's kind of confusing, but what he's saying is the absence of money will lead to dissatisfaction.
Right.
But he said that money alone can never create true job satisfaction. That's the intrinsic rewards, feeling like you're doing something, making a contribution, feeling like you're part of a team. So it's important to never underestimate the importance of those intrinsic rewards. And I think sometimes as leaders in plants, we get caught up in the moment of dealing with whatever we're dealing with. I think we sometimes forget to recognize our people for the great things that they're doing.
Yeah. And well, management by walking around is really
Means a
important.
lot.
Particularly if you just engage your folks in a conversation and then you act on whatever they've suggested. And, the fact that you care enough to go do that, I think, it says a lot to the folks on the floor.
It does say a lot. The key there is if they say something, don't just listen to them, hear them.
Yep.
And that second part, act on it.
Yep.
Because if you don't act on it, they're not going to feel value.
Right. Or tell them why you can't.
That's exactly right. Sometimes you can't. And have that transparency and honesty with them, and they'll understand. It's a funny thing when you're a consultant, you go into places for a short period of time, and you have to, in a really short period of time, figure out what's wrong so you can recommend what to do about it. And what Carl said, I couldn't agree more. I think 70% may be too low. I get most of my good information from the plant floor, because I go into meetings with managers and engineers and I hear a story of what's going on in the plant, and I go into the plant and I might as well be on a different planet. The story that they're sharing, I don't know if they're trying to convince me or they just don't know, but I've seen that more often than not. And unfortunately, I think it's lack of connectivity to the plant. Sometimes they're trying to snow me, but I'm old enough. It's not easy to snow me in one of those plants, and you're in the same boat. But I get a completely different story.
Yep. Well, we've come up on our hour, it looks like, so we better wrap it up here. I just want to, and I'll let you close with whatever you want to say here in just a second. I just want to encourage folks, reliability is not just maintenance. Reliability is proper design, procurement, operations, and maintenance. It's essential, but it's not sufficient. And the value in a good, reliable plant is 10% or more higher production, 10% or more lower cost, lower energy consumption, better safety, fewer injuries, and better environmental performance. And you've got to have a executive sponsored approach to it. There has to be a partnership or collaboration across functional boundaries, measures to support that, and a process for engaging the shop floor. If you have all four of those, you're going to do well. If you're missing any one, the likelihood of your success is significantly less. If you're missing all four, you're screwed. It ain't ever going to happen. So, Drew, any last comment you have there?
Well, of course, I agree with everything that you said. So I will just comment that making a plant reliable, generally speaking, from an engineering perspective, is relatively simple. Reliability engineering is maybe 10 or 20% the engineering part. It's 80 to 90% social psychology. Yep. Get yourself up to speed on the social psychological aspects of what make organizations tick. The other thing that I would say, if you don't know how to speak the language of reliability in dollars and cents, learn how to. Understand, what is it that you're doing? How is it affecting return on net assets? How is it affecting your balance sheet? For instance, as maintenance people, as you said, I would rather have 2 entire plants when I only need 1. I just can't afford to do that. So I would encourage you to not just learn the words, but learn their meaning and understand how they are interconnected, and understand when you're making a proposal for an investment in reliability, you need to understand what is the internal rate of return or the net present value of that proposal. You don't want to propose something only to have somebody that does understand those things, that it's not a good investment. And again, investment is the key. When you are making a proposal to improve something within your facility, make sure, as Ron said, that you're leading with that value proposition. And
$150 million.
Exactly.
Or
exactly.
10,000 or whatever it is, So yeah, you're right. I mean, the soft stuff is the hard stuff.
It is.
Right? The soft skills, the hard stuff. There's plenty of folks out there who can address that. So anyways, well, we better wrap it up here. And I thank you, Drew. Appreciate you joining us today. And
it's
hope
my pleasure.
Folks have taken a nugget or two away from the session. So thanks, guys.
I appreciate it. And Ron, it's always great spending time with you. And anyone that wants to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or I'm sure that my email is shared somewhere, but don't hesitate to reach out to me. But Ron, thank you again, and hope to connect with you very, very soon again in the future.
Right.
All right.
Say goodbye.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you both for a great session today. On behalf of the entire team here at Mobius Connect, thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us today too. Just a quick reminder, you can see past episodes of Connect Conversations on YouTube by searching Mobius Connect, and on Reliability Connect at www.reliabilityconnect.com. Be on the lookout, as new episodes typically air every other Tuesday. If you are interested in engaging with other industry professionals or would like to participate on the industry's live feed and forums on Mobius Connect, you can visit www.mobiusconnect.com to create your free profile, and be sure to follow us on our social media at Mobius Connect to stay up to date with the latest community happenings. If you have any questions at all or would like to be introduced to either Ron or Drew, please email our team at info@mobiusconnect.com. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day. Please stay safe, and we will see you at our next episode.